Right, with us now, the former vice chair of the DNC, Michael Blake, and the former press advisor to then House Speaker John Boehner, Maura Gillespie. I want to talk about Liz Cheney, and I do want to stipulate that 5 years ago, this would have been unimaginable. It just would have. She was the number 3 Republican in the House, really conservative, rock grip conservative, Dick Cheney, all that. That said, are there Republican voters out there in swing states who see a Liz Cheney endorsement now after anything that happens and say, hey, Liz Cheney's voting for Kamala Harris, so I might also?
I think the fact that she's out on the campaign trail today with her, again, to your point, 5 years ago, I would have never guessed that she would be out there campaigning with Kamala Harris for Kamala Harris. But because she is, again, she has the conservative credentials to back her up, but I think this speaks volumes. And what she said, we can survive bad policy. We can't survive another attack on our democracy. And that's what Liz Cheney has said. And she believes, her being out there and putting her name, her legacy on the line here by endorsing Kamala Harris, it says a lot. And I do think there are Republicans who are not keen to vote for Kamala Harris, but they know the dangers of Donald Trump, and they're not happy with how this has gone and how it has caused many losses for the Republican Party over the years. So this may sway some. I don't think to the extent that maybe is needed, but it could move some people.
Yeah, is this about making Democrats feel good about playing nice with some Republicans, or are there persuadable Republicans?
It's about winning an election, and it's about making it
option C. You're going for option C.
I'm going with getting elected here, and so the determination is this: when you're in states such as Wisconsin, where you're essentially talking about 1 to 2 points, yes, it will matter. It's not just a random place. We're talking about where the Republican Party began. And so when you think about the surrounding areas, even outside of Milwaukee, the wild counties of Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington, these are the places that will have tremendous impact. It's a reason why this past Friday we hosted and always host a nightly prayer call. We had one of the reverends out of this area to demonstrate what's possible. So when you think about the issues, whether it be the economy and when you talk about women, I would rather have a Liz Cheney standing up with us and choosing the country as opposed to choosing a cult.
Yeah, Jeff Zeleny was saying to me that this is sort of a play for the Nikki Haley voters who may not be swayed yet and still could change their minds. I do want to ask about this new book coming out from Melania Trump. The Guardian got some excerpts, and the former First Lady talks about abortion and has a diametrically different view than her husband in the Republican Party. She says a woman's fundamental right of individual liberty, her own life, grants her the authority to terminate her pregnancy if she wishes. It is imperative to guarantee that women have autonomy in deciding their preference of having children, free from any intervention or pressure from the government. Okay, 12-dimensional chess here, where you think that Melania Trump is in cahoots with the Trump campaign trying to muddy the waters on abortion, or just something she doesn't care what her husband thinks about?
I think Melania is making it very clear that she stands on the right side of justice as opposed to her husband. And so when we think about whether it be here in New York with Prop 1 or across the country and saying being opposed to an abortion ban, she is saying a woman should decide what to do with her body. Full stop. A man can be and should be a feminist at the same time, and she is making it very clear that a woman should decide what to do with her body. It is abundantly clear that this is not just a Democratic issue. This is an issue across the country. It is one of the fundamental reasons why Republicans have been losing since Trump has been on the ballot. It is another reason why a vice president will get elected this year.
But is it embarrassing for the Trump campaign more, or can they point at this and say, big tent?
I think that you saw J.D. Vance change his tune at the VP debate, trying to talk about abortion in ways of we have to build back trust with women. I don't know that people necessarily believed it, given the fact that he's on record for saying that he would endorse a national ban. But I think what she's saying here, to me, and that's something that I've long believed, is it is a conservative message just to say that you don't want the federal government telling you what you can and can't do with your own body. That goes to a conservative belief of having a smaller, more accountable government. Yet the Republican Party has let it become so much so just a religious issue and feeding into the far right fringe, as opposed to what most of the country believes, which is this stance that we should have autonomy over our body and medical freedom for half the population.
I want to play some sound from Donald Trump overnight, where he is talking about Haitian migrants in the country who have legal status, temporary legal status. Listen to this.
You have to remove the people and you have to bring them back to their own country. They are, in my opinion, it's not legal.
So you would revoke the temporary protected status?
Absolutely, I'd revoke it and I'd bring them back to their country.
What if they won't receive them
They
like
will.
they're not?
Well, they're going to receive them. They'll receive them. If I bring them back, they're going to receive them.
Okay.
All right, there are several different things at play here. There's the moral issue and there's the political issue. I just want to stay for a second on the purely political issue here. In terms of what voters think about about legal versus migrants who are in the country illegally. Is there a difference when you talk about deporting legal migrants? Does that play differently politically?
It should, but I'm afraid that on the far right fringe of the MAGA Republicans, it doesn't. And he knows that. He can speak about, even if they are legal, he can say that they're illegals and now I'm out of here. That rhetoric and that language he uses, he does solely to rev up his base. That is it. I think, again, for the Republican Party at large and for the country at large, we are a nation of immigrants. And the Republican messaging on this should and always needs to be is to be the land of hope and opportunity. We need to have law and order. So of course we want to have it done in the right process, but to stop and to say that you're just going to deport people who are here legally and contributing to the community, as many of the Haitians are in Springfield, Ohio, contributing and adding value to the community, is a disservice to them all.
We just have to be very clear. This is a racist policy being proposed by him. This is not just dangerous rhetoric that has impact in Ohio, where they've clearly communicated to stop this nonsense. It's here in New York, whether it be in Brooklyn, it be in South Florida. You have a man who is literally saying he would remove American citizens because they come from another country. This is about him trying to win an election to discredit black and brown communities once again, and we cannot tolerate it. And it is reprehensible that we continue to allow this man to say these things. He is doing this to win an election to appease a base who believe that black and brown people should not be here. And when we think about the contrast, go deeper. J.D. Vance is the lead sponsor to eliminate DEI in the federal government. They are saying that a black woman is not black. It is a rhetoric that they believe will be victorious. However, let's be very clear, whether it be New York, Florida, Ohio, etc., Haitians belong here. Jamaicans, like my family, belong here. Our communities belong here, and we will not tolerate this nonsense and this racism that's coming from Trump.
There is a distinction, though, between citizens and people with temporary legal status.
And he's being very, but let's be clear, John, this is about the politics. They're not diving into what's one or the other. He is saying you don't belong here. And this is a consistent rhetoric that has come from Donald Trump. This is the same man who tried to kick out black people when it came to housing, the same one who called for the death penalty. This is consistent when he believes he does not think we should be here.
Michael Blake, Maura Gillespie, thanks so much for being here, both of you. Great to see you in person. Sarah?